Hey guys, my name's Taylor, and today I'm going to be reading to all of you a story from Noah's Narrations. This is Taken by Scoutmaster Park. Lee Jemin had always had a hard time fitting in. Being a cross-dressing femboy in a small rural community was hell enough as it is, but not having friends and being an outcast amongst your peers, that was murder. Jemin had pretty much resigned himself to a life destined to be shunned and outcast, but that's when he met Jay Park, his new scout leader. Jay Park was handsome, incredibly handsome, with a chiseled jaw, impeccable abs, and a flawless look that captured his breath and took it away. Jemin was captivated, but there was no way someone as perfect as Jay Park would ever fall for him. Is there? This is Taken by Scoutmaster Park. Lee Jemin was really having trouble fitting in at Scouts. He kept getting left out of things, and he couldn't figure out why. The only thing they would say to him is that he wasn't one of the boys. It didn't help that he couldn't complete any of the physical tasks set to prove his worth, climbing trees or tying knots, and he always tripped on hikes. Jemin thought it was because he was small. At 15, he hadn't hit a growth spurt yet and stood at just 5 feet 2 inches. He had delicate features, even for an Asian boy, and long hair that went past his shoulders. He looked more like a girl than most of the girls in his class. The truth was, however, that Jemin had an incredible crush on their sexy, incredibly handsome scout leader, Jay Park. He had been in love with him since joining Scouts 2 years ago and couldn't ever get him out of his mind. Jay Park was older than the other leaders, 21 or 22, Jemin guessed. He had a muscular build from all of his previous years as a former idol and rapper when not volunteering as a scout leader. Jay usually wore loose-fitting clothes, but you could tell underneath them there were pecs you could bounce coins off of and abs you could grate cheese on. Jemin would come up with any excuse to go to Scouts just so he could be around Jay, helping clean up after meetings or doing patrols for badges together. His favorite badge to try and earn was "I'm a leader," because it meant spending one-on-one time with Jay. Scouts this week was at the local climbing center near the high school, where they met every week. Jemin didn't want to embarrass himself by trying to do climbing again. His tiny little hands struggled with holds, so decided to stay behind while everyone else piled into Taesung's mom's car for the 5-minute drive. "Why is your hair so long?" Taehyung asked as they waited for everyone to load up. Jemin was trying to work out how to tie his hair back with the broken elastic he had found in his bag. He usually got teased about something, so he didn't think much of it. Taehyung stood up from where he was sitting on the hood of Taesung's mom's car and took a step closer to Jemin. "I said, why is your hair so long?" "I like it this way," Jemin replied, finally tying his hair back in a messy ponytail. "It makes me feel more like myself." Taehyung grabbed the end of Jamin's ponytail and pulled it tight. "You know guys don't have long hair, right?" Taesung saw what Taehyung was doing and snickered before quickly looking away when their eyes met. Jemin tried not to show them that they were getting to him, but tears welled up in his eyes anyway. He quickly looked away from both of them and wiped away the tears that ran down his cheeks. "You should go cut your hair before Jay Park sees you," Taehyung sneered at him before getting into the back seat of Taesung's mom's car. "Yeah," Taesung agreed. "Jay doesn't like boys who look like girls." Jemin climbed into the seat behind them and quietly sobbed for the rest of the short journey. When they arrived at the climbing center, everyone piled out of the car. Jemin opened his mouth to ask if he could stay behind again, but Jay Park walked over with a smile on his face. "Everyone here? Great, let's get going." Jay clapped his hands together and started walking toward the entrance, assuming everyone would follow him. Jemin sat there for a moment until Taehyung elbowed him in the side. "Well, come on then," he hissed, already forgetting about the teasing from earlier. Jemin quickly climbed out of the car and jogged to catch up with Jay. As they walked through the entrance together, Jemin tried not to stare at Jay's ass in his tight-fitting shorts. Jay spent a few minutes talking to the receptionist and came back with a bundle of clipboards and pens. He handed one clipboard to each scout that was there today, 7 out of 12, and told them what information needed filling out. Full name, date of birth, any medical conditions or allergies. Jamin finished the sheet first and waited for Jay to come over so he could hand it to him. When everyone had finished filling in their information, they followed Jay into one of the small rooms off to the side that had been converted into a classroom/seminar room. Jay placed all the clipboards onto an empty chair before sitting down at one end of a long table littered with climbing gear, harnesses, helmets, shoes. "Today we are going to learn about safety when climbing," he said as everyone found a seat around the table. "Safety is our #1 priority here at Scouts," Jay continued, as he picked up different pieces of climbing equipment and showed them around. He was wearing his usual scout leader attire that made him look incredibly handsome and distinguished, but even under his smartly presented uniform that you could see how his pecs rippled every time he moved his arms. "But once we have learned everything, I want you guys to teach me today." Jamin's heart skipped a beat when Jay said, "Teach me." He looked into Jamin's eyes as if no one else was there. "We'll split into 2 groups. Those who have completed their I'm a Leader badge will go with me for some serious outdoor climbing, while those still trying will need to stay here to continue learning the basics." Jamin's heart sank. He hadn't realized he was the only one today who hadn't finished their badge. Taehyung and Taesung had both finished theirs at the last scout sleepover, tying each other up in sleeping bags. Jay stood up and picked up all of the clipboards from the chair. "I'll go hand this in so they know we're ready to start, then I'll be back in a minute." As soon as Jay was out of sight, Taehyung elbowed Jamin in the side again. "Better not mess it up for us," he sneered. Taesung laughed and added, "Yeah, otherwise none of us get to do any real climbing." Jamin tried not to let them provoke him, but his eyes welled with tears anyway. "Don't cry like a little girl," Taehyung said when he saw Jamin's face crumple. "Yeah, Jay won't want you if you cry all the time, faggot," Taesung added. Jamin bit his lip to try and stop himself from crying. He had been told so many times that crying would just make things worse. But tears trickled down his cheeks anyway. Thankfully, Jay came back into the room before anyone else could see him crying. He frowned slightly when he saw Jamin wiping away tears, but didn't say anything about it as he placed all 7 clipboards on the table again. "Okay, it looks like everyone is ready to go." Jay clapped his hands together again and looked around to check everyone was paying attention. Even though there were only 7 scouts here today, he still did a head count just to be sure no one had gone wandering off already. Jay grabbed a handful of gear from the table before walking toward one of the doors leading out onto the climbing walls. As soon as Jay turned away from them, Taesung took Jamin's clipboard and placed it at the bottom of the stack, then swapped Jamin's harness with one of the helmets from the table. "Come on," Jay called out as he held the door open. "Try not to be too much trouble for once." Jamin quickly wiped away any stray tears that were still running down his cheeks and followed Jay through the door. Everyone was soon crowded around Jay Park as he showed them how to put on a harness and helmet correctly. He asked everyone to help each other check their harnesses, first adjusting the straps so they fitted snugly, making sure all of the buckles were done up tight, then checking each other's work. Jay saw Jamin standing by himself near one of the walls. "Taesung, come help Jay with his harness," he called out across the room. Taesung looked over toward Taehyung and frowned slightly when he saw that their harnesses were already secure. They both shrugged at each other before Taesung jogged over to where Jamin was waiting with a pout on his face. "Turn around," Taesung said without looking at him. He adjusted all of Jamin's straps in silence before picking up one end of a strap and tugging on it lightly to make sure it was securely fastened. When everything checked out okay, Taesung stepped back from him without saying anything and joined Taehyung by where Jay was attaching carabiners onto loops in 5 different colored ropes. The brightly colored ropes dangled down from metal chains set into each wall every few feet. The walls had big plastic holds screwed in randomly all over them, but also lots of smaller holds set into fixed roots with numbers next to them indicating what level difficulty they represented, 1 being beginner-friendly, 10 being advanced. Jay had everyone line up in front of him while he explained what each piece of equipment did. A carabiner is rated for 25 kilonewtons, Jay said with a smile as he held one up, which is more than enough to hold any of you here. He glanced at Jamin as he said it, making him blush. Jay then showed them how to hook the carabiner through 2 loops in their harnesses, the lower loop in the front and a higher loop on their right side. Always make sure it's clipped through both loops, Jay warned. Otherwise, if you fall, your harness will twist around and you'll hurt yourself. When everyone had copied Jay and clipped their carabiners onto the ropes, he continued explaining what they would be doing today, practicing climbing up walls and back down again. They were not going to be jumping from the top. Jay didn't want to risk their safety. "I see some disappointed faces there," Jay said with a chuckle when some of them groaned at this news. "Okay, let's all try not to scramble for the same wall all at once." The scouts lined up in front of different walls and waited for Jay's signal before starting to climb. Jamin chose a beginner-friendly wall that no one else was interested in, but still waited his turn while others climbed nearby. Jamin's small hands struggled to grip onto any of the holds on the wall, but his feet easily found ledges or tiny protrusions he could stand on without needing too much support from his upper body. He climbed a few feet off the ground before looking down timidly. Tae-sung, who had chosen an intermediate-level wall, was cheering Tae-hyung on as Tae-hyung scrambled his way up after losing his grip twice already. Jay walked over to where Tae-sung was standing and watched Tae-hyung climb for a moment before looking around at everyone else's progress. He saw that Jamin was only about halfway up the wall, but stopped climbing after every move to look around shyly. "Hey Jay," Jay called up to him. "You okay?" Jamin looked down at his feet and nodded. He couldn't find his voice to answer when he saw how far everyone else was climbing. Tae-sung was almost at the top of his wall and was pointing that out to everyone who would listen. Jay picked up a brightly colored foam ball from the ground and tossed it up to Jamin. "Try not to let this one drop, okay?" Without waiting for an answer, he started walking over to see how high Tae-hyung had climbed now. Jamin bit his lip and tried not to cry as he continued climbing higher up the wall. The tiny ledge he had both feet on only went another 2 feet upward before ending at a rounded top with lots of holds screwed into it, so climbers could practice without needing a harness or ropes, called bouldering, Jay had explained earlier. He rested there for a minute before summoning enough strength and courage in his legs and arms to pull himself up onto the flat surface and stand up. "Good job!" Jay clapped from where he stood by Tae-hyung's wall. He caught Tae-sung trying to hide a scowl with one hand, but pretended not to notice. Jamin blushed at the praise and quickly looked around for somewhere higher than where he was now. To his left, there were some overhangs used mostly by experienced climbers, but straight ahead of him, there was a more gentle incline, pocked with lots of small holes that made good handholds. He took a step toward that section of wall, but lost his balance when one foot slipped off its ledge. He flailed for a moment before falling backward, but managed to stay turned around so he could see what was behind him as he fell. Jay jumped forward onto Tae-hyung's rope as soon as he saw Jamin fall off the top of the wall. It was only a 10-foot drop to the floor, but Jay didn't want him to land on his head or twist an ankle. Every scout stopped what they were doing and turned toward Jamin as he fell backward off the top of the wall. Time seemed to slow down for everyone as they watched him flail in midair for a moment before landing on his back with a thud. Jamin laid there for a moment, stunned from hitting his head against the ground when he landed. 2 feet away from where his face was sat Tae-sung's bright orange helmet. He must have dropped it when Jay jumped forward onto Tae-hyung's rope. Jay quickly climbed down from Tae-hyung's wall and jogged over to where Jamin was laying sprawled out on his back. "Everyone stay at your walls!" Jay called out when they saw him run over to Jamin. "Tae-hyung, stay here and make sure no one goes anywhere." Jay knelt down next to Jamin and gently shook him by the shoulder. Jay, can you hear me?" Jamin groaned softly and blinked up at Jay kneeling next to him. "Jay?" he asked weakly. "Yeah, I'm here," Jay said with a worried smile. He brushed a lock of hair away from Jamin's face that had come loose from his ponytail when he fell. "Is anything hurting?" Jay asked as he checked each of Jamin's limbs for signs of swelling or bruising. My head. Jamin pointed at it before dropping his hand back onto the ground with a soft thud. Okay, stay right here, Jay ordered as he stood up again quickly, before walking over to where all the gear was still piled up by the long table near their classroom door. He grabbed one of two small black duffel bags and unzipped it quickly. He rummaged around inside for a moment before finding what he was looking for. A small plastic box filled with adhesive bandages in different sizes. Jay jogged back to where Jamin was laying and knelt down again next to him. Can you sit up for me? Jay asked as he flipped the lid open on the box of bandages. Jamin nodded and slowly sat up, wincing when his head spun from moving too fast. Hold still, Jay ordered gently as he picked out a medium-sized bandage and removed its paper backing. He pressed it against the back of Jamin's head, where there was a small spot of blood sticking his hair together before smoothing it in place. Does that feel better? Jay asked when he saw Jamin relax slightly after the bandage was stuck in place. Jamin nodded and looked at his lap shyly while Jay continued checking him over for any other injuries. Nobody had ever taken care of him like this before, not even his mom or dad. Once Jay was sure there were no other injuries beyond some scrapes on his hands, he stood up again and held out a hand to help Jamin stand up as well. There we go, Jay said with a smile when Jamin's hand slipped into his own. Just take it easy for the rest of the day, okay? Jamin blushed again but nodded silently without looking up at Jay. He quickly pulled his hand free from Jay's gentle grip once he realized what he had done and looked away shyly. Jay grabbed both duffel bags and walked back over to Taehyung by their classroom door. The other scouts started moving again once they saw that everyone was okay, after making sure Taesung didn't try climbing higher than he could handle, with lots of groaning. Everyone back inside! Jay called out as soon as all scouts were busy with something else. We need to debrief and talk about what happened. They all sat back down around the long table again with Jay at one end. He passed the duffel bags around for them to put away their gear once all the helmets were back on top of the table. Who would like to start us off? Jay asked when everyone was sitting quietly waiting for him to speak. No one raised a hand or even met Jay's eye except for Jamin, who hesitated for a moment before his hand darted into the air. He quickly lowered it and looked away shyly when everyone else turned toward him. Jay chuckled softly and nodded in Jamin's direction. Okay, Jay, why don't you go first? Jamin bit his lip nervously but couldn't find his voice, like usual, when he tried to think of how exactly to explain everything that had been happening lately. Getting teased more often, being left out of things just because he wasn't good at climbing trees or tying knots, while everyone else was joking around and laughing together. He started trembling slightly as tears welled up in his eyes again. Jay frowned slightly when he saw that, but didn't say anything yet. He could guess what might be bothering Jamin from how Taehyung and Taesung had been behaving ever since they joined Scouts 2 years ago. Take your time, Jay, Jay said gently as he reached across the table with one hand resting it on top of Jamin's trembling one comfortingly. We've got all day. Jamin felt a warmth spread through his chest as Jay's hand settled over his own. No one had ever been this kind to him before, let alone touched him with such tenderness. It was like a balm for his wounded soul. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling in his voice and the tears that threatened to spill over. I've been feeling left out, he finally managed to say, his gaze fixed on the grain of the wooden table beneath his hands. The other scouts, they tease me and make me feel like I don't belong? Jay's expression hardened slightly at Jamin's words, and he gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. I'm sorry you're going through that, Jay, he said sincerely, his voice tinged with anger. Scouts is supposed to be about teamwork and support, not tearing each other down. Gaining some confidence from Jay's empathy, Jamin continued. And today, they ignored me when I asked for help with my rope. They just laughed and made fun of me. His voice wavered with a mix of frustration and hurt. Jay's brows furrowed deeply as he absorbed this information, feeling an increasing sense of protectiveness toward Jamin. He knew that Taehyung and Taesung could be immature at times, but this was crossing a line. I see, Jay said firmly, shifting in his seat. Thank you for sharing that with us, Jay. He glanced around the table at the other scouts who were starting to show signs of guilt or discomfort. Does anyone else have something they'd like to share? Jay asked pointedly, subtly inviting them to reflect on their behavior. Taesung fidgeted in his seat before speaking up hesitantly. I didn't realize it was bothering Jay that much, he admitted sheepishly. I thought we were just messing around, you know? I didn't mean to make him feel left out. Taehyung nodded in agreement, his usual cockiness replaced by a quieter demeanor. Yeah, me too. I didn't think it was a big deal. Jay's gaze softened as he looked at the two boys. It's important to remember that our actions can have an impact on others, even if we don't intend it, he said gently. He turned his attention back to the rest of the scouts. Let's use this as an opportunity to reflect on how we want to treat each other going forward. Scouts is about building each other up and learning from our mistakes. There was a collective murmur of agreement as the scouts absorbed Jay's words. They could see now that their behavior hadn't aligned with the values of scouting, and they were ready to make amends. Jay smiled warmly at them, proud of their willingness to change. He then focused his attention on Jaemin, who had been listening quietly throughout the discussion. I want you to know that your voice matters, Jay, Jay said sincerely, keeping his hand on top of Jaemin's for support. You are a valuable member of this team, and I'm here to help you grow and succeed. Jaemin felt a rush of gratitude wash over him at Jay's words. It was like finally being seen and acknowledged after years of feeling invisible. Thank you, he whispered softly, his heart swelling with newfound confidence. Jay gave him a reassuring smile before standing up from his seat. Now that we've had this conversation, let's focus on our next challenge, building a campfire from scratch. Excitement bubbled up within the group as they gathered around Jay, eager to learn and work together once again. And as they ventured into the woods with their duffel bags filled with fire-starting materials, Jaemin found himself walking beside Jay, their hands brushing against each other every now and then. It was a simple gesture, but it filled Jaemin with a sense of belonging he had never known before. And as they knelt down by the fire pit and began assembling the kindling, his heart fluttered with hope for what the future might hold. Jaemin glanced up at Jay, their eyes meeting for a brief moment, and he couldn't help but wonder if this newfound connection could grow into something more. Only time would tell, but for now, he was content to bask in the warmth of Jay's presence. As they worked together to ignite the campfire, the sparks between them mirrored the flames that danced before their eyes, igniting a passion that would burn brightly long after the embers had turned to ash. Jaemin and Jay knelt side by side in front of the fire pit, their hands hovering over the bundle of kindling they had carefully arranged. The rest of the scouts watched with anticipation, eager to see if they could successfully start the campfire. Jaemin could feel the warmth of Jay's body next to him, and it sent a surge of electricity through his veins. He had wanted to be close to Jay ever since that first scouting trip, but he never thought it would be possible. Now, here they were, their hands almost touching as they prepared to light the fire. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. It wasn't just about starting a fire anymore. It was about this undeniable connection he felt with Jay Park. He wanted to be seen, to prove his worth and feel like he truly belonged in Scouts. Okay, Jay said softly, breaking the tension that had settled between them. On the count of 3, we're going to use our matches and lighters to ignite the kindling. Remember, small flames at first, not too much. Jaemin nodded nervously, his dark eyes fixed on Jay's face as he listened intently. 1, 2, 3. Jay counted slowly. Their hands moved in unison as they lit their respective pieces of kindling. The small flame flickered at first, but soon grew in strength, devouring the dry twigs and paper beneath it. A cheer erupted from the other scouts as they watched the fire take hold. Jay couldn't help but smile at their success, but his attention quickly returned back to Jaemin, who was staring at their joined hands in awe. "We did it," Jay whispered with pride evident in his voice. Jamin tore his gaze away from their hands and met Jay's eyes again. "Yeah," he replied softly. "We did." A mixture of emotions swirled within Jamin as he looked at Jay, their hands still connected. He felt a sense of accomplishment from successfully starting the campfire, but it was nothing compared to the warmth and tenderness that blossomed within him from their shared moment. He could see the genuine happiness in Jay's eyes, and it made his heart pound in his chest. There was something undeniably special between them, and he wanted to explore it further. As the other scouts began gathering around the fire, basking in its glow and sharing stories, Jamin mustered up the courage to speak. "Jay," he began hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper, "can we talk?" Jay turned towards him with a warm smile. "Of course," he replied softly. "What's on your mind?" Jamin swallowed nervously, acutely aware of how close they were sitting. The heat from the fire warmed his skin, but it paled in comparison to the heat radiating between him and Jay. Jamin started, then paused for a moment as he searched for the right words. "I've been feeling something different lately," he finally confessed, his cheeks flushing with a mix of anticipation and vulnerability. Jay's brow furrowed slightly as he tried to decipher Jamin's words. "Different? In what way?" he asked gently. Jamin took a deep breath before continuing. "When I'm around you, I feel this connection. It's like my heart is constantly racing, and I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted shyly, his gaze fixed on their still-joined hands. Jay smiled at Jamin's confession, seeing the intensity that lingered in his eyes. But he knew he couldn't reciprocate. He cared deeply for Jamin even more than he cared to admit, but could not risk crossing the sacred boundary between scout and mentor. "I appreciate your honesty, Jay," Jay Park said earnestly. "You really are a great scout, and I see a bright future ahead of you." Jamin's heart sank at Jay Park's words. He knew his heartfelt confession wasn't being reciprocated and that Jay was trying to let him down easily. Without a word, their hands moved as if guided by an invisible force. Jay's fingers intertwined with Jamin's, their palms pressed together in a silent affirmation of their budding connection. A shiver ran down Jamin's spine at the intimate touch, and he couldn't help but marvel at how perfectly their hands fit together. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the bond they were forming. Jay gently squeezed Jamin's hand, sending a jolt of electricity through both of them. "Don't ever stop believing in yourself, Jay," Jay Park admitted softly. "You've got a lot to offer the world, you know that, right?" Jamin silently nodded, his heart overflowing with a cocktail of emotions. Yeah," he blushed, his voice filled with newfound confidence. As they sat by the campfire, hands intertwined and souls ablaze with newfound confidence, Jamin knew that this could be the beginning of something extraordinary. The flames danced before them, casting a warm glow on their faces as they leaned closer together. In that moment, surrounded by nature's beauty and embraced by each other's presence, they found solace from the world outside. They were no longer individuals lost in the wilderness. They were kindred spirits united by fate and fueled by a longing of self-worth. With every touch and every stolen glance, their bond grew stronger, like an unquenchable fire that would burn for eternity. Jamin knew that Jay Park could never reciprocate his feelings, but he knew he had found something better. A true friend and mentor who believed he could accomplish anything he put his mind to. And that was worth more than a mere teenage crush could ever ignite. That's the end of the story, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. There's quite a few more of these I want to do, and hopefully these will all be uploaded soon. This is all part of a series planned later down the line called Noah's Narrations. It's a collection of over 700 short novellas that were written and edited by Ashton Godfrey, and are going to be narrated by both myself and several other cool guys who will each be doing their own takes on these stories. None of these stories that we're doing right now are in any particular order. We're just picking out a few good ones to get started and hopefully hook you in for when Noah's narration starts proper in the near future. And, yeah. My name's Taylor Chalamet. I really hope you enjoyed my narration. I mostly do modeling for AI-MaleArt on DeviantArt, along with some really cool guys, but I'm also looking forward to being a part of this project and hopefully many more down the line. Hopefully you'll enjoy what I do and want to hear more. But anyway, guys, take care and thanks for listening. Bye!